Imagine a town that had no king, no empire, and no unified army, yet it managed to terrorize Rome, resisted his power for centuries, and leave such a deep mark that even today we unknowingly celebrate its rituals. Its name has been forgotten by many, but its influence is still alive. The Celts, indomitable warriors, lovers of freedom, defenders of the forests, rivers and stars. Their civilization stretched from the Alps to Ireland, from the coasts of Portugal to the misty lands of Scotland. And for centuries they stood up to the greatest empire of all time. It was they who humiliated Rome by sacking the city when it was still young. It was they who united entire tribes to challenge Julius Caesar in one of the bloodiest wars in history. And it was they who gave rise to one of the oldest and most well-known rituals of the modern world, Samhain, the Celtic predecessor of Halloween. But their story is much more than a series of battles. It is the story of a culture that lived connected to nature, to its spirits, to its symbols, with a language that sang myths and legends by the fire. A culture that, although Rome tried to erase with sword, taxes, and religion, survived through ruins, manuscripts, and popular memory. In this video, we will travel to the heart of the Celtic world. We will discover who they were, how they lived, why they fought, and what led them to face an enemy much larger than themselves. And stay until the end, because I will show you how an ancient Celtic ritual designed to protect the living from the dead transformed into the most famous costume party on the planet. To understand who the Celts really were, we must move away from the typical image of warriors with iron swords and decorated shields. Celtic history does not begin with war, but with metal, the forest, and fire. Their origin goes back to the late Bronze Age, between 200 and in what is today Austria, southern Germany, Switzerland, and northern France. A network of villages was born that did not call themselves Celts, but shared language, customs, beliefs, and a unique way of seeing the world. This first culture was known as the Hallstatt civilization, named after archaeological findings discovered in an ancient cemetery in this Austrian locality. They were experts in working with iron, bronze, and gold. They forged swords not only for war but as spiritual symbols. They were farmers, cattle herders, and also traders. They exchanged saltine and wine with Greeks, Etruscans, and Mediterranean peoples. Their social structure was divided into clans and tribes. At the top, the warrior elite, adorned with golden torques, linen cloaks, and helmets with horns or crests. But there were also artisans, farmers, blacksmiths, and above all, druids, the wise judges and guardians of oral knowledge. They didn't write, they memorized thousands of lines of poetry, laws, and myths. Celtic culture was not static. It evolved, traveled, and mixed. By 500 BC, a new phase emerged, known as the Latine culture, more artistic, more sophisticated, and more expansive. Their jewelry, weapons, and vessels, everything was decorated with flowing curves, spirals, shapes that seemed to imitate the movement of the wind or the course of rivers. It was during this period that the Celts began to expand across almost all of Western Europe, France, Belgium, Spain, Portugal, Northern Italy, Switzerland, Austria, Germany, the British Isles. There are even records of Celtic tribes in the Balkans, in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, and beyond the Danube. But unlike Rome or Greece, the Celts did not build empires. They did not have walled cities or a centralized army. They were autonomous tribes, united by culture, not by flag. There are seen their greatness and also their greatest weakness. While Rome advanced with disciplined legions and iron laws, the Celts resisted like nature itself, dispersed, diverse, free, but also vulnerably. Rome, for it is not yet the imperial colossus that will conquer the Mediterranean. It is a young republic, proud, powerful, but not invincible. And one day, that illusion of invulnerability is shattered forever. The year from the depths of the north, a Celtic tribe called the Senones crosses the Alps and descends upon Lazio like a storm. In the Battle of Olaya near the Tiber River, the Roman legions are crossed. Humiliated, disorganized and seized by panic, the soldiers flee, and the Senones enter Rome. The streets are empty, the people hide, the Senate takes refuge on the Capitol, and for the first time in its history, Rome is sacked, the houses burn, the temples are desecrated, the ruins smolder for days. The stories of this tragedy would be told for generations, like a collective trauma that would never heal. That night when Rome was taken by barbarian Celts, a shadow was born that would accompany the Romans for centuries, the fear of the north, the terror of the Gauls. Since then, the Romans began to build a narrative of moral superiority against the barbarians. But deep down, they knew the truth. The Celts were not savages. They were organized, brave, and capable of defeating anyone. In the following centuries, tensions between Rome and the Celtic tribes of Gaul would become constant. There were skirmishes, broken treaties, ambushes, betrayed alliances, but the great storm was still to come. It would be in the time of Julius Caesar, when the Gallic Wars would turn that ancient fear into a crusade of total conquest. And in the midst of that fire, a hero would be born who would put all of Rome in check. His name, Vercingetorix. His legacy, uniting the Celtic tribes for the last time against the power of the Roman eagle. 58 BC, Rome is on the rise, but his ambition is no longer limited to Italy. And at the forefront of this expansion is a man with an insatiable hunger, Gaius Julius Caesar. Governor of Cisalpine Gaul and Transalpine Gaul, Caesar says, in Free Gaul, the perfect opportunity to gain fame, power, and wealth, and thus begins the Gallic Wars, an 8-year campaign that will mark one of the bloodiest moments of the ancient world. Facing him, the Celtic tribes fight bravely, some resist. Others make deals, but Caesar is not looking for agreements. He seeks total conquest. Rome advances like an unstoppable machine. Thousands dead, villages razed, prisoners chained. Gaul, divided into dozens of tribes, begins to fall one by one until a young leader emerges from the ruins. His name is Vercingetorix, son of an Arvernian nobleman executed for seeking power. Intelligent, charismatic, relentless, he achieves what no one had before, unites the Gallic tribes under a single banner. Vercingetorix does not face Rome like others. He does not play for honor, he plays total war. He applies scorched earth tactics, cuts up supplies, provokes uprisings, and in no time, he has Caesar on the ropes. The breaking point comes in 52 BC, at the fortified hill of Alesia. There, Vercingetorix entrenches himself with his army, surrounded by Roman legions. But Caesar does not just besiege him, he builds a wall around the city, and then another wall around that wall. It's madness, a siege within a siege, a death ring tightening both from the inside and the outside. The Gauls try to break the siege. Vercingetorix resists. External allies attack fiercely, but in the end, hunger and time defeat the Celts. Vercingetorix surrenders. He dismounts his horse, throws his weapons at Caesar's feet, and becomes a prisoner of the empire. 6 years later, at Caesar's Grand Triumphal Parade in Rome, Vercingetorix is displayed, chained, before a euphoric crowd. Shortly after, he is executed in an underground cell, without trial, without mercy. With his death, Gaul falls completely under Roman control. The Romanization begins, new laws, new language, new gods. And though many customs survive in secret, Celtic independence in Gaul is over. But not in all of Europe, because beyond the English Channel in the misty islands of the north, the Celtic flame still burns brightly. While Gaul was subdued by blood and fire, in the northwestern islands, the Celts still resisted like free wolves in the fog. especially in a wild, wet, and mountainous territory, Britannia. In 43 AD, Emperor Claudius decided it was time to subdue those misty lands. The legions crossed the Channel, landed, and began a conquest that would last for decades. Some Celtic tribes made deals, others fought, but none would leave a more fierce mark on history than the Iceni and their queen, Boudica. Boudica was not just a queen. She was a mother, a warrior, a woman wounded by betrayal. Her husband, King Prasutagus, had been an ally of Rome, but after his death, Rome violated the pact. Her lands were confiscated, her family humiliated. Boudica was publicly flogged. Her daughters were raped. That was the breaking point. No more deals, only revenge. 61 AD, Boudica gathers a force of over 100,000 Celtic warriors, women and men, peasants and nobles, all with one goal: to expel Rome from their island. She sacks Camulodunum, modern Colchester. She razes Londinium, London, then a Roman colony. She destroys Verulamium, Sten Albans. More than 70,000 Romans and allies die. It was the bloodiest rebellion on British soil against the empire. The Roman legions, outnumbered, withdrew their forces. But the battle-hardened governor Suetonius Paulinus organized a brutal counterattack. In a final battle at a location still unknown, the disciplined, armored, and ruthless Roman troops annihilated the rebel army. Boudica, according to chroniclers, commit suicide before being captured. She dies as she lived, free. Her name for centuries was forgotten until it returned as a symbol of British pride, female resistance, and Celtic legacy. And although Rome managed to dominate much of Britannia, it never conquered the entire island. Because in the north, in the wild lands we now call Scotland, the Picts, another Celtic people, offered such brutal resistance that the Romans had to build a wall. The Fennis Hadrian's Wall, more than 10 kilometers long, was built not to expand, but to defend. And to the west, in the green and magical island, Rome never set a single standard. The Irish Celtic tribes continued to develop their culture without interference, preserving a heritage that, as we will see, would be key to saving their entire legacy. When the dust from the wars in Gaul and Britain began to settle, when Rome was singing victory and raising temples in conquered territories, there were still two untamable corners on the Celtic map: the Highlands of Scotland and the Green Island of Ireland. In the north of Britain, the Picts, Celts covered in tattoos and blue paint, lived among mountains, swamps, and mist. They did not recognize Rome. They did not pay tribute, and they attacked with ferocity. In the year 22 AD, Emperor Hadrian, the Orden die Arend, announced 100 miljoen territories in those wild lands, ordered the construction of a wall, Hadrian's Wall, a stone border more than 100 kilometers long, with forts, towers, and garrisons, marking the limit of the Roman world. Beyond it, only Celtic land and freedom. Rome tried once more. They built another wall, even further north, the Antonine Wall, but it was also abandoned. Scotland was never conquered, and further west, Ireland, called by the Romans Hibernia, remained an untouched Celtic jewel. Rome didn't even attempt to invade it, perhaps due to its isolation, perhaps out of lack of interest. But the truth is this: Celtic culture in Ireland not only survived, but flourished. Without emperors, without legions, without Roman roads, the Irish tribes preserved their language, mythology, druids, and ancient rites. For centuries, they were the beating heart of Celtic culture, and it would be there much later where Christianity would arrive, but not to erase this culture, but to merge with it. Ireland would become the last Celtic beacon, a land where history, legend, and the sacred were not written in marble, but in runes, songs, and manuscripts. At the beginning of the 5th century, a new visitor arrived in Ireland. It didn't come with swords or legends, but with books, symbols, and a cross. It was Christianity. Instead of a military invasion, what occurred was a unique cultural transformation. The Celtic world was not destroyed, but absorbed, and in many cases, reimagined. The protagonist of this transition was Saint Patrick, a missionary who, according to tradition, was enslaved by the Celts and later returned to their lands as a preacher. But Patrick did not impose the faith with fire and punishment. Edith saw, by understanding the Celts, their worldview, their symbols, and their customs, the Druids, who had been the guardians of oral knowledge for centuries, were gradually replaced by monks and abbots. But those Irish monasteries were not like those of Rome. Their ancient myths were still written, heroic epics were sung, and pre-Christian legends were copied in astonishing detail. It was thanks to these monks, devoted scribes and poets, that we know treasures today, like the Book of Kells or the mythological cycles of Ulster and the Fianna, where heroes like Cuchulainn and Fionn Macumhail live forever. Even many Christian symbols in Ireland are in fact adaptations of ancient Celtic emblems. The shamrock, symbolizing the Trinity, was already sacred. The Celtic cross linked to Christianity with the Druid solar disk, and many new religious festivals were placed over ancient ones. Thus, a unique Irelandin was born, deeply Christian, yes, but also deeply Celtic. As Rome collapsed under the Germanic invasions, Ireland transformed into a beacon of knowledge, spirituality, and oral tradition. From there, missionary monks would travel to the continent, bringing Christianity and the Celtic heritage with them. The Celtic identity, far from being extinguished, camouflaged itself under the garb of a new faith and survived. And among all the festivals, beliefs, and legends, there is one celebration in particular that best represents this powerful blend of pagan and Christian. Its name is Samhain, and perhaps unknowingly you celebrate it every October 31st. Before there were costumes, before trick-or-treat, before the carved pumpkins, there was already a magical and feared night, Samhain. For the Celts, the year didn't end in December, but on the night of October 31st, when the harvest concluded, the sun set earlier, and winter brought with it the silence of the dead. Samhain, pronounced Soin, marked the end of one cycle of life and the beginning of another. It was a border between light and darkness, between the known and the invisible, between the living and those who were no longer there. On this night, the veil between worlds became thin. It was believed that the spirits of ancestors returned, that fairies could wander the fields, and that dark forces were unleashed in search of wandering souls. To protect themselves, the Celts would light large bonfires on the hills, leave offerings of food and drink at doorways, and wear grotesque masks to confuse the spirits. Some even changed houses for the night, as a way of deceiving death. It was an ancient ritual, full of respect and fear. There were no sweets. There was no commercial joy. There was fire, ash, silence, and mystery. When Christianity arrived, the church could not eradicate Samhain. So, as often happens in history, it adapted. In the 8th century, Pope Gregory III instituted All Saints' Day on November 1st, and later All Souls' Day on November 2nd. Samhain became Christianized, but its pagan symbols remained latent. Over time, Irish immigration, especially to the United States, brought this tradition with it. And as in the mix with other European customs, Samhain was reborn under a new name, Halloween. The jack-o'-lanterns, heirs of the turnips, carved by the Irish. The costumes, echoes of the ancestral masks. The trick-or-treating, reflecting the ancient offerings, and the idea that for one night, or the other, world is closer. Thus, an ancient Celtic festival, born among fog, fire, and memory, survives in millions of homes every October without many knowing its true origin. The Celts did not leave empires, They did not leave marble cathedrals or stone legions, but they left something far more powerful, a living memory. They were defeated in battle. They were absorbed by larger cultures. They were silenced by the writing of the victors. And still, they never disappeared. They live on in the words that survive in Gaelic, Welsh or Breton. They live on in the melodies of bagpipes that cross mountains, in the intertwined knots of the Celtic cross, in the tales of fairies, goblins, giants, and druids. They live on even in you, every time you light a candle on Halloween without knowing you're repeating an ancient ritual. The Celts were more than warriors. They were dreamers of stone and fire, guardians of forests, planters of legends, and their true victory was this: to be remembered not for what they conquered, but for what they inspired. So, the next time you see a Celtic spiritual, hear a surname with Gaelic roots, or attend a party with masks and fire, remember that you are walking with the spirits of a people who never gave up. Did you know this story? Did you know Halloween has such ancient roots? Leave me your opinion in the comments. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories like this, and share this video with someone who also deserves to know the Celtic legacy.